Word of God, we are grateful that you are alive in us and in this place, and in the Word written that we will break open tonight. We thank you, Lord, for the Word that comes to us through very human instruments, including our own. May we hear your voice tonight in ways that can be amplified to your people far beyond this room. In the name of our Lord Jesus, we pray. Amen. Amen.
Michael, thank you, and that amazing song. Thank you for singing that for us today. We do have these two mics, so perhaps Landon can take one of them, and maybe, who knows, I guess if we have, maybe one's enough, or just let them go around. You know, we are not a large crowd, so I think it would really be neat to meet each other as we start. And maybe just say where you're from, and if you have a church, then you can name that. And it'd be interesting if you were, I know several of you were here last year, so if you were here last year, just say that, because that would be interesting. Because we did have a class in November of 2015. So that would be interesting too. But he has a mic, so let's introduce ourselves. I think that would be valuable, right?
Person by person?
Yeah.
All right.
Just, yeah.
Testing the mic.
Sounds great.
So I'm Betsy Fay from Seattle, Washington, with Joanna, and went to University Presbyterian Church for 30 years. And I'm Pamela McCann, friend of Betsy, and also worked with Earl at University Presbyterian Church, and was here last time.
I'm Mark DeVries, and I'm at First Presbyterian Church in Nashville, Tennessee.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ken Brown. I'm the interim minister at the Echo Lake Church of Christ in Westfield, which is about an hour and 10 minutes from here up north.
I'm George Calvert. I'm from the Church of the Good Shepherd in Bonita. That's an Episcopal church. I'm the rector of the church there. Only 7 miles from the Mexican border in the San Diego area.
Mike Denham, I'm staff at National Presbyterian Church. I'm glad to say that I heard Earl 41 years ago for the first time.
Cynthia Parker. I live a block from here, but served in Englishtown. If anybody's a Deadhead, one of their best concerts was there.
I'm Mary Ann Fair, and I graduated from the seminary 10 years ago, and I became a Christian at 30 under Earl Palmer's ministry in the Philippines. I was there with 3 children and my husband, and now I live 10 blocks from here, and we go to the University Chapel, Princeton University Chapel.
Hi, I'm Sherry Zhang from Princeton, New Jersey. I go to Princeton Christian Church.
I'm Stuart Spencer, pastor at the Thompson Memorial Presbyterian Church in New Hope, Pennsylvania, about 30 minutes from here. And I was here for part of Earl's presentation a couple of years ago, but I had some conflicts, so I missed good parts of it, so I'm glad to be back and be able to partake in more.
Good evening. I'm Craig Dunn. I'm the pastor of First Baptist Church in Madison, and I was also here in November 15th.
Good evening. I am Linda DeCausey. I am from the Shiloh Baptist Church in Trenton, where my pastor actually attended Princeton Seminary, and I was also here last time and enjoyed it immensely.
Hi, good evening. Andrew Garber, I'm from Houston, Texas, and I'm starting at Princeton in the fall, and happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Kathy Northrup from Rio Verde, Arizona. I serve Community Church of the Verde. Good evening, I am Marcia Lincoln Hines, and I pastor a church in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, out with the Amish.
I'm Kathy Reed, and I'm pastor of Lutheran Church in Waterbury, Connecticut.
I am Rosemary. I live in Rhode Island, and my church is Jesus is Luz. It's a Pentecostal church in this town.
Hi, I'm Giovanni from North Jersey. I'm a seminarian in a Lutheran denomination in North Dakota. I do a distance program, so I take advantage of things like this. Happy to be here.
My name is Robert Cossack. I'm a pastor at Trinity Church Delaware in Hocassin, Delaware. And I'm a CTM student online, and I came to Clash or Collaboration last fall. And love the campus, love the people, I'm blessed to be here.
Hi, I'm Jeff Leininger, pastor of the Warren Point Presbyterian Church in Fairlawn, Bergen County, New Jersey, about 15 minutes west of the city. And this is my second go-around.
We've met, I'm Dale Rounds, I oversee the continuing education program here at Princeton Seminary. CTM program that Robert just mentioned is the Certificate in Theology and Ministry program that we offer online with our faculty. So that's my plug for Dave.
I'm Gabriel Light. Earl introduced me earlier.
Hello, David Bushman. I serve as the Baptist chaplain at Princeton University. I'm also leading an interdenominational athletic group called Athletes in Action. I also was here for the early one. I appreciate it. And specifically, as somebody who spent 25 plus years with the 18 to 22-year-old crowd, I appreciate the focus on trying to connect some things with the young adult world, because that's where I live.
My name is Paul Almquist. I serve as senior pastor at West Halem Friends Church in Newburgh, Oregon, which is a long ways away. But I have a son and daughter-in-law that live here at Princeton, and he's the second year of his student at Princeton Seminary. I also teach a preaching class at George Fox University. We call it, the title of the class is Speaking as Ministry. So I'm here to pick up some pointers, not only for myself, but for our students.
That's awesome. Hi, my name is Tony Watley. I'm from Seattle. Earl's been my pastor ever since he moved to Seattle, and I have had the pleasure of being on his board ever since he started Earl Farm Ministries.
I'm Elizabeth Coleman. I'm pastor of Lakeview Presbyterian Church in St. Petersburg, Florida, and also a graduate of Princeton Seminary, MDiv and TH.
Herbert Johnson, pastor of Freedom of Church Without Walls in the Chicagoland area. This is my second go-around, so I'm very excited and looking forward to it.
Jay Morris, I'm the rector of Aquia Episcopal Church in Stafford, Virginia. Honored to be back at Princeton.
And I'm Landon Bennett, Earl's study assistant from Bethany Community Church in Seattle. And if you have any questions or need help with anything throughout the week, Dale and I are happy to assist you in that.
Well, this was wonderful. What an amazing mixture of geography and everything in this group today. And I just think it's just a joy to be with you. Let me go over what's going to happen during these 3 days so that you've got your schedule in front, but this way you can know exactly what's coming. I'm going to begin tonight by, once again, talking a little bit about the case for expositional preaching. I'll give a definition of it one more time, and which we did last time too. But also, I want to zero in tonight on some aids for exposition. And the first aid for exposition is to notice the words, notice the language in every text. So we'll look at that tonight after some introductory comments that I'm going to make. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to be the first speaker in the morning, because they go together. Tonight, I want to focus on the words, and tomorrow morning, on the narrowing and focusing of a passage, and what I would call the tracing of the story. Every text has a story in it, and to know how to trace what story is going on, what event is going on, and to trace it and understand the development of the storyline in every text. So that we'll look at tomorrow morning. Then we have the joy of Michael Denham with the reverberating word, part 1 of his presentation in the second session tomorrow morning. Then if the first session tomorrow afternoon is going to be this one, I love the title, Engaging the Mind, Igniting the Heart, Sending It Home. Wow, Kay Brolight and Mark DeVries. And I'm looking forward to that presentation of these two. To show the importance of exposition seen as a total family, a total person challenge for a pastor. And this should be a very exciting thing tomorrow afternoon. Then on Thursday, the final session, before we go for your evening, tomorrow night, which is a tradition in Princeton, you get tomorrow night off. You don't have to come anywhere. You can go to eat anywhere you want downtown. But the last presentation will be the session number 5, and that will be windows on the text. In the windows on the text, I want to talk about illustration. How you, we look at the words tonight, we look at the story development in text. Now, how do you illustrate and put windows in on that? And now, let me say a word about the handouts. In tonight's packet, you get some handouts, but you're going to get handouts in each session that will go directly with the session. Like tonight, you got the text that we're going to look at tonight, because we have a biblical text to look at tonight. You will see tomorrow morning another biblical text you'll get a chance to look at. And then when I get to the illustration time, I'm going to be trying to make the case for the fact that you need to do exposition. In doing good illustrating, you have to do exposition of non-biblical material. And so I decided to put in an article that I wrote recently after I presented 2 books by C.S. Lewis to our Kindling's Muse. I have a ministry that one of the aspects of my ministry is what we call Kindling's Muse, where I take a book or a theme or a topic or sometimes a biblical passage and do an in-depth study with people. They make an iPod cast of it, and it's in our website and all. But I decided in December I did a study of 2 books by C.S. Lewis, That Hideous Strength, his 3rd novel in the Space Trilogy, the most terrifying of his novels, That Hideous Strength, and then his one of his most important theological works that he wrote just 2 years later, Miracles, a Preliminary Study. So I took those 2 books and titled that Kindling Muse, Power That Harms, Power That Heals. And I decided there was so much positive response to the Kindling Muse we did with people live, and we recorded it, of course, but I decided that I'm going to write that up and do an expanded presentation for people that were there. And so I insert that as that's the picture of C.S. Lewis, and then it's a reflection on. So there you're getting an example of exposition of non-biblical material. You've got to know how to do that too, it seems to me, in order to be a good illustrator. So you can you understand what your illustrations are and understand who you're quoting and what's behind what they're quoting. So I put that in as a handout early on for what we're going to do in that illustration section. And then you get your night off, and then we have 2 more sessions on Friday morning. Again, the first one will be Michael Denham doing the second half of his presentation on the reverberating word and the whole theology of planning worship, this expositional, throughout the whole year and in a church setting. And then there'll be a coffee break. And then finally, my last session with you is how to preach from the Old Testament. And especially I'm going to focus on the book of Psalms. And again, I have handouts for that you'll get in that morning rather than getting them now. so that you're going to get handouts for all of these sessions, like you did today when you come in the door. So, but I did give you an advanced handout on the illustration section because it's a little longer, the C.S. Lewis novel, and you get that ahead of time. Last 2 years ago, we had a marvelous time here on the case for expositional preaching. We titled it "The Joy of Preaching Expositionally from the Bible," and I decided after that session we had together that I wanted to write that up in a new, hopefully, and fresh way. And so I put this document together, which you also got in your packet. I titled it, "Then Something Happened." And that's because that's the opening line of a quotation that I gave from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I started my piece on what we did last year, 2 years ago, from a Dietrich Bonhoeffer quote at the beginning and then a Dietrich Bonhoeffer quote at the end. You'll see it. But the opening one is, I think, quite remarkable. It's a letter he wrote when he was, after the Confessing Church movement was started, Bonhoeffer was deprived the right to preach in the church because he was a signer of that Barmen Declaration, and all those who were in the Confessing Church who signed that could not preach in the state church, the German church. And by the way, his last public sermon that Bonhoeffer gave was in 1936 at the World Olympics, when the boys in the boat from Seattle went and competed in the crew race and won at the Olympics 1936. Jesse Owens ran 1936. Louis Zamperini ran 1936. Dietrich Bonhoeffer gave a speech in 1936 that Confessing Church pastors sponsored. It was the last thing. See, the Nazis eased up a little bit during the World Olympics because they wanted everybody in the world to think they were being very more liberal. And then they clamped down again. And so they allowed the Confessing Church to have a worship service during the World Olympics. A lot of people aren't even aware of it. And Bonhoeffer gave the sermon in Berlin. And that was his last. But in 1936, since he signed the Barmen Declaration, he formed a little school of Confessing Church pastors at Finkenwald. It's called the Finkenwald School. He had about 6 different generations of pastors, all young male pastors actually, but they all were pastors in the German church who had signed the declaration, and now many of them deprived from being in the church. But they were, so they had to be in independent churches and stuff like that in order to preach and be supported, because they couldn't take offerings even. They were not allowed to take offerings. Isn't it interesting? They were not allowed to use mimeograph to mimeograph any stuff they wrote. The Nazis really were clamping down on any kind of expression of that Confessing Church movement. But anyway, Bonhoeffer had classes, and it was at Finkenwald. And during that time, in 1936, he wrote a letter to a friend, and I decided to put that as the opening quote. Then something happened, something that has changed and transformed my life to the present day. For the first time, I discovered the Bible. Since then, everything has changed. I have felt this plainly, and so have other people around me. It was a great liberation. I'm glad he didn't say, and all the people are bored to death now because I've studied the Bible too much. But no, it changed his life. And I love that opening quote. It's from Eberhard Bethke's great biography on Bonhoeffer. And then with that, I told my story a little bit like I did with you 2 years ago. I told how I got into exposition really because as a sophomore at University of California, I got into a small group Bible study group. And that little Bible study group were a group of just amateur guys, my own age, were reading texts of the New Testament. I was invited in. I wasn't even a Christian when I got into that first. But a friend of mine, Arba Hudgens, who later came to Princeton Seminary too, when I was here at Princeton Seminary, but Arba Hudgens invited me into that little group. And I went to that group, and I really encountered for the first time the New Testament and looked at it through adult eyes. And what happened was, the New Testament, I discovered it then in that little group of guys. I discovered that the New Testament, when you read it, it's just any way you want to read it, the New Testament always points you to its living center. to Jesus Christ, who is the living center. He's the living Word. And the Old Testament, by anticipation, prepares you for that living Word. And so I saw that in that little Bible study group. And I tell about that in the opening of this little article that I handed out to you. And at a retreat at Lake Tahoe, when Bob Munger was the pastor of the church, I went to that retreat with these other guys. And Dr. Munger put the Christian faith this way. He said, when on the basis of what you know from the evidence, you're willing to trust in the trustworthiness of Jesus Christ, you're ready to become a Christian. And that was about all he said. But I'll tell you, it's what it did for me. And that summer at Lake Tahoe, I'm a sophomore now at Cal Berkeley, I became a believer and then got back to Berkeley and got very active in that Bible study group. And then a funny thing happened when I was a senior. One day I said to myself, I'm enjoying this. I was a pre-law major, and I was thinking that would be what I would do career-wise. And I got so interested in this Bible study group, and I was very fond of our student pastor at First Presbyterian Berkeley, a guy named Carl Thomas, who was a student pastor. And I one day went in to see Dr. Munger, and I said, I think I'd like to do what Carl Thomas does. I don't know if I wanted to be a pastor like you are, but I'd love to work with students, because I'm enjoying it so much now with my own classmates, being in this Bible study group and seeing guys turned on like I was turned on to the New Testament. And so Dr. Munger said, well, you have to go to seminary. And I said, and he said, because a pastor is a teaching elder in our, because he's Presbyterian, so he said, that's what you're going to be, a teaching elder. So you have to learn how to teach. And so I said, okay, and I applied at Princeton Seminary. I came to Princeton Seminary, one of the rawest recruits I think that Princeton ever had. I had a roommate who was very theological and did a lot to correct all that. And I lived in Hodge Hall. I lived in 302 Hodge Hall. I later found out at the 50 reunion of one of the 50 reunion classes, I sat next to Pastor Han from the Yamnak Presbyterian Church in Seoul, Korea, the pastor of the largest Presbyterian church in the world at that time, Yamnak. And I was sitting next to Pastor Han. He's since gone to be with the Lord. And we were sitting there, and I just said, just for the fun of it, where did you live when you were here at Princeton? He said, 302 Hodge Hall. I said, what? That was my hall too, 302 Hodge Hall. And so that experience at Princeton was a Renaissance experience for me. And it was in so many different ways. I made so many great discoveries. I discovered C.S. Lewis really here. I discovered Karl Barth, who became such an influence in my life, and Bonhoeffer, and the theological framing of my life. And also, I got involved with some small Bible study groups at Princeton University, and I stumbled into those. That was, again, kind of a divine appointment type thing. One day, we were a bunch of students, we represented the seminary to try to lift the flag for Princeton, and the way we did it in those days, this is a long time ago when we weren't up on things and the way you should do it, but we would put the flag up for Princeton, and we would make a visit to key churches in the area. That particular Sunday, we were in Jenkinstown in New Jersey, and Jenkinstown, Pennsylvania, maybe. Anyway, I was there. That's how memorable it was. But I was there, and that night before we did skits with the youth. That was of marginal value. The next morning, we shared in worship with the church, and then we would be introduced during the worship service as students at Princeton Seminary, and this is the school that we're supporting as a church, this training pastors, and so we were there. And then after that, we were farmed out to homes, people. And the guy I was the home I was farmed out to was a family named Kelly. That's their true name. And this is not fake news. And this is true. They were the Kelly family, and I was farmed out with them. And their son was Glenn Kelly. True, that's a true name. And Glenn Kelly was a freshman at Princeton University. And I was, of course, the brand new student at Princeton Seminary. And he had not gone to the skit night the night before with the high school youth. So he didn't, and he hadn't gone to church that day, so he didn't know who in the world I was. But I was a guest of the family. And so we talked about Princeton, because he's at Princeton University, I'm at Princeton Seminary. And he was telling me how wild his dorm was. And I was telling him how sedate Hodge Hall was. I mean, they were married students, after all, on the next floor, so you had to be really quiet. So anyway, I told him about it, and he told me about his school. And then he said to me, would you like to see my dorm? And I said, yeah. So that week, I went over to Princeton University. It was an all-male school then, so it was much wilder. And I went over to Princeton, and Glenn was there. He's a great big tall guy, about 6'4". And I went in, he showed me his dorm, showed me all the guys, and then he said, and I don't know why I said this to him. I wasn't trying to be an evangelist at all, but I said, you know, when I was in Berkeley, I was in a little small Bible study group in my dorm. It meant a great deal to me. And I don't have one of those now. And if you'd like, I'd be glad to come over and do a little Bible study with your guys if you would like to. And it's the honest truth. Glenn said, hey, you guys, quiet. He's a student at the seminary, and he'd be willing to come over and do a Bible study with us once a week. And for some reason, would you guys like to do it? So some of them said, okay. So that began what became for me my ministry at Princeton. In fact, I got an excuse to not have to do field day. I'm the only student who was excused from field day because I had 5 of those Bible study groups going, and they would take up all my time. And ended up, in fact, when I was with Mary Ann Farian and her husband Jim for dinner at your house a few months ago, John Kalutha was there. He's a judge, and he's retired now, and he was in that Bible study group. I mean, I just had so many guys that were in these Bible study groups that I did at Princeton. And you know, I made a discovery. I did that for the next 3 years of my career at Princeton, the 3 years I was here. And I discovered that given time, if you just look at the text will always introduce you to Jesus Christ. It'll always do that. Just let it do it. Don't worry about it. That's what will happen. And what happens is that Jesus Christ you meet in the text always wins your respect. He always does. The church may not win your respect, but Jesus Christ always wins your respect. Maybe St. Paul doesn't always. I always figured in Bible studies that some weeks Paul wins, some weeks he loses maybe, but that's all right. Given time, St. Paul also always points you to Jesus Christ. Everything in the New Testament does. And I found out that that is how the Bible wins us. And it happened to me, and I saw it happen to guys. It happened to Glenn Kelly. Glenn Kelly became a believer. And in fact, several years later, I was in Denver, Colorado, and a great big tall man came up to me and said, do you remember me? I said, yes, you're Glenn Kelly. And he had become an orthopedic surgeon in Denver, Colorado, was active in his church. It all happened in that little Bible study group. And it was very interesting, and the Christian church, where he was, obviously Jenkinstown, where his family was. But anyway, I saw that happen in person after person, and it had a formative effect in my life. And I think one of the reasons I got into exposition is because I saw that it worked. It just simply is without too much trouble. If you let the text speak, it finally makes its own point. And I became sold on that. So this little article that I wrote tells that story. It tells a story of how the text tends to win us over. In fact, I put this quote in there at one point from Pascal. He's one of my heroes. Pascal said, people are generally, this is page 2, people are generally better persuaded by the reasons which they have discovered themselves than by those that have come into the mind of others. And that's why a pastor who just preaches from his own experience or his own vision is not as persuasive as if a pastor can help a text to make its own point so that a reader has that aha moment of seeing it for themselves before someone tells it to them. And I put that in my next line in explaining what is exposition. And I put it this way in the next line on that passage. I said, this is exposition. Exposition is the task of enabling a sentence or a paragraph in a biblical text to make its own point so that we as readers and listeners experience it for ourselves. Exposition then with that aha moment, when I see it myself, not because a pastor told me that God loves me. It makes a big difference if you see it in a text, God loves me, than if a pastor tells you, even with wonderful illustrations. That's why I'm going to have to warn you about illustrations before we look at it. The illustration can be a window, but it's not the story. It's a window into the story, but not the story. But when a person can have that aha moment, that is such an electrifying moment. So exposition can become a rich way of discovery so that connections can happen that put texts together toward the finding of the whole witness of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And the joy of exposition happens when a teacher and a student together have moments of this kind of discovery together. And that's why I think it's so important for a pastor to think in we language rather than you language. Here's a pastor right here who's now just got drafted to be pastor of your church. We had dinner together tonight, and you were drafted to become pastor. And you've been doing prison ministry, and now you're with a different set of prisoners. You know, your church drafted you. But I want to tell you, if they can have that aha moment when you're preaching, and when you're doing a study of the text, and they see it for themselves, I'll tell you, a person that sees it for themselves, not because you told them, but because you saw it, then you've got a really enduring moment in their life. And when you do it together, that's why I believe every pastor should be in a small Bible study group themselves, where you can see it with other people, and you see it as well. And that is what we did 2 years ago. And we did one more thing 2 years ago, which I don't want to repeat again for you now, but it's in the thing. I actually gave guidelines to get yourself ready to do exposition. And I suggested five steps that are just basic steps of writing a commentary. I've said to every young Christian, why not write your own commentary of the text? If you're a journal keeper, journal that way. Write a commentary. You know, Dag Hammarskjöld was the Secretary General of the United Nations. And that man was a devout man. And he kept a journal that was published, actually, won awards, called Markings. And the Journal of Dag Hammarskjöld, I have it, were basically his comments on texts that he was reading as a Lutheran layman in his church. They had texts that they listed, and he would read the text, and then he would write markings, his own impressions of that text. And they became just brilliant. And that is a layman doing his own commentary on a text. I urge that to people. And so I gave suggestions last year, and so in case you weren't there last year, now you've got it all printed out for you. The 5 steps: establishing the text, first of all, figuring out when it was written, establishing it, and then the historical setting of the text. Try to see it in its own history. And then to make that bold step in every bit of commentary work where you try to say, what do the words say? We're going to do that in just a few minutes. And what do they mean? What did Jesus say? What did he mean? What was he after? What was he going for? What is, in a sense, the theology that's in here? You have to boldly try to figure that out. And that's why you need some people to check and balance you so you don't go into crazy cultic edges. There's the value of the confessions of the church, the value of seeing what others have said too. And then the 4th is the contemporary question, where you relate it to the culture itself that was the 1st century and to our culture. That's why we need new commentaries in every generation, because every generation's got to cope with the text in terms of our culture now. And that is the 4th. And then finally, the last question is maybe one of the most important, the discipleship question. What is the text saying to me? What is its impact on my life? So that you don't just, as a preacher, it's terribly bad, terribly dangerous. As a preacher, and I've been a preacher for a while, so I know how dangerous this can be. But to do and to say, boy, I hope my teenagers can learn this. Or I hope my people, especially my stiff-necked people that are kind of into this or into that, I hope they can hear it. Before you ever say that, say, I hope I can hear it. I want to get myself under the text first. before I start thinking what they should do under the text. So I want to have that aha moment too. And so that's what I did. I wrote this all up for you, and it's yours if you want it. And I ended with the Bonhoeffer quotes. And just to do justice to Bonhoeffer, I'll read the final quote. The final quote from Bonhoeffer I put in is from his Life Together. And Life Together is the one book he wrote telling about Figgenwald, telling about that little school of pastors that he had. And before it was closed by the Gestapo. But before it was closed, he wrote this beautiful thing about, it's in the book Life Together, which is telling about Figgenwald. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. Don't you love that? Colossians 3:16. The Old Testament day begins at evening and ends with the going down of the sun. It is the same time, it is the time of expectation. That's Old Testament. The day of the New Testament church begins with the break of day and ends with the dawning of light of the next morning. It is the time of in the darkness. It's a time of fulfillment, the resurrection of the Lord. At night, Jesus Christ was born, a light in the darkness. Noonday turned to night when Christ suffered and died on the cross. But in the dawn of Easter morning, Christ rose in victory from the grave. And that's this beautiful line of Bonhoeffer's kind of analysis of what the whole story means. So this is for you. And for me, I worked hard on that one, and I just wanted to have it for you. And I actually wrote it, as you see on the back page. Here, I dedicate it to you guys, see? Revised text and prepared by Earl Palmer for this event, The Joy of Preaching Through Exposition of the Bible, Part 2. Okay, it's for you. Now, tonight, I want to take a text. Somebody made a joke and made fun of me today at dinner. One of you said, he said, I have a text. That's what you said. The first way you remember me. I stood in this big convention and said, I have a text for you. Everybody said, what's that? And because I do that so many times. I'll say, I have a text for you. And so, okay, I have a text for you. And it is in the book of Romans, chapter 12. And I want us to look at that text. I've printed it for you in the new RSV. And then I've also done a kind of a reckless thing too. I've decided to print it for you in the new RSV, but also in the Jerusalem Bible and the Message by Eugene Peterson, who has written a freestanding, free version rendering of the text. Okay, now let's look at that text from Romans. As you know, Romans is developed, it has several parts to it, and it is Paul's most complete work. It's a serious work. It's not impulsively written like Philippians, or it's not just a book that seems to have more pastoral intent like Ephesians. In fact, Ephesians is a kind of funny book because the whole half of the book, the first of it, is just a big long prayer for the people of Ephesus. And then very specific advice about marriage and all that. But Romans is different. Romans starts with the preface, the famous preface, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It's the power of God for salvation to everyone who has faith, the Jew first, also the Greek. In it, the righteous character of God had broken through by surprise. God's grace, God's faithfulness for our faith. Wow, that's how it starts. And then it has he almost like a prosecuting attorney, he becomes like a prosecutor, and the whole world is guilty before God. It has not a very pleasant beginning after that. And then suddenly in the middle of a sentence, he tells about this radical interruption where God comes through in the middle of our crisis with this decisive action in Jesus Christ. And then what Karl Barth calls the most important chapter of the whole Bible, Romans 5, where Paul puts everything together in Romans 5 and points out that there's an old Adam, new Adam, but there's a reconciliation that happens because while we were still sinners, Christ died in behalf of the ungodly. Scarcely for a righteous man would one die, maybe for a good man some would dare to die, but God shows his love for us. in that while we were yet sinners, while we're sinners, he died for us. Not while we were repenting, but while we were sinners, he died for us. And then the ending of the 5th chapter, where sin increased, the grace of God increased faster. It's an amazing chapter. Then after that, he goes into the Christian life, talks about the Christian life. And he becomes autobiographical there. He tells about what I would like to do, I don't do, and oh, wretched man that I am. He has all that in there. That's all in the 6, 7, and 8. Ends with a great poem. If God is for us, who could be against us? And you know, they lived during the time of Nero. They can think of all kinds of people who are against us. But he did not. He did not. He did not leave us without his support. Who has the right to say the last word? Only Jesus Christ. For in him, through him, all things hold together. And Jesus Christ has conquered, made us more than conquerors through his victory. And that's the 8th chapter. Then he spends 3 chapters on ancient Israel. He says, yeah, this is all true for us, but what about God's ancient people? He does that. Ends that with a great benediction also. And has this amazing line. All Israel will be saved, because that's the decision God made. And then how do we understand it? Who has been a counselor to God? He ends with a quotation from the book of Job. That's chapter 11. Then from chapter 12 all the way through to 16. And you know, Paul's never been to Rome. He's writing probably from Ephesus to Rome. He wants to go to Rome. But the thing that's amazing is, in chapter 16, he knows 37 names and groups of people in Rome. He knows so many people in Rome already. It shows you how the early Christians were moving around in the Roman world. And we're learning more and more about that. Archaeologists have been amazed how the church was growing, person by person. People in guilds and in work groups would move from place to place. And anyway, Paul knows so many people. But in chapters 12 to 16, Paul actually takes on this subject as I see it. He raises the question, since we're, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the grace of God, the mercies of God, to present yourselves a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. And then he calls on us to play a role in the Roman world. And that's the main focus from chapter 12 on. How to play the role we're supposed to play here and now in this less than ideal place where they are in the Roman Empire. And that's the text I decided to choose for our sort of, you might say, case study tonight. I want us to look at the words and see what he does with the words and see how he teaches us. So here's our text, chapter 12, starting with verse 9 through 21, 9 to 21. I'll read it to you, first of all, in the NRSV. Then we will look at it, and we'll look at the language and see the words that are used. And then we'll look at and see how other, like Eugene Peterson, and also the Jerusalem Bible, which is a wonderful Roman Catholic rendering of the text, to see how those theologians and interpreters endeavor to interpret it too. We'll look and see and learn from them. And by the way, let me say this about, we're now going to look at language. You don't need to know Greek and Hebrew really to work with language nowadays, especially in the English language, because of the tremendous number of translations that are now available. And I say to a pastor, I say it to lay people, if you're going to do Bible study, try to get 5 or 6 translations out in front of you. Use a kitchen table and get those translations out. And just see how that will do. You don't even you don't need to know Greek. But what you can do by seeing 6 or 7 translations of a great text, you'll see how the translators are struggling with the language, especially key words. You'll see it today. How do you handle those key words that are in the text? That'll be true, we'll see in the Psalms we'll work with tomorrow, or Friday morning too. How he handles the text. And you can see it just in English translations. Now, if you do know Greek, or you're able to do lexical studies, then you can even have the joy of making the discovery within a lexical setting, where you're actually able to see a dictionary of the Bible, a theological dictionary of the Bible, and a translation aid that comes when you get the Greek word, and then you can go over to the lexicon and see what and by the way, there are so many things that have been produced for us that are available to us on lexical aid to help us with Greek words and Hebrew words that appear in the text. So we'll do that tomorrow, 2 days from now with the Psalms. We'll do it now with the New Testament. Psalm, first out, let's look at chapter 12, starting 9. Let love be genuine, hate what is evil, hold fast to what is good. Love one another with mutual affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not lag in zeal, be ardent in spirit, serve the Lord, rejoice in hope, be patient in suffering, persevere in prayer, contribute to the needs of the saints, extend hospitality to strangers. And that is just, you might say, pastoral discipleship advice. And then it gets hard from that moment on. So we're going to divide this into 2 parts. It's not particularly hard up to that point, though when you look at all the words closely, it may be harder than you think it is. But when you get to the end of that, we would say it's just wonderful discipleship advice. But then you get to verse 14, bless those who persecute you. Then it gets to be harder. And so we'll look at the first half before we get to the second half. Let love be genuine. Okay, now I have to do my first word study. The RSV is struggling to handle this word. The RSV, the new RSV, which is a very good translation, decides to do it strictly with a positive word. Let love be genuine. Now, if you look at Eugene Peterson and also look at the Jerusalem Bible, you see they're struggling more with that word. Eugene Peterson says, love from the center of who you are, don't fake it. Run for dear life from evil, hold for dear life to good, be good friends who love deeply, practice playing second fiddle. Okay, it's quite an elaborate, free translation. And notice the New Jerusalem Bible is also struggling with this opening line that in the RSV is translated genuine. Let love be genuine. Now they're struggling with how to translate genuine. Notice the Jerusalem Bible says, let love be without any pretense. Well, where did they get that idea to even put that in there? Because what the RSV is, or what the Greek text did by Paul, and what Paul did there, is he uses a word at the very beginning. In fact, he's going to do 3 words that are all related to each other, and he puts all 3 of them together in the opening paragraph. It makes this opening paragraph electrifying when you see it that way. He takes, first he does this word, and takes, before we get to the 3 words, he takes a word, upo. Upo means under. It's a common prefix word. And then kritikos. Kritikos, upo kritikos. Kritikos is from the root krino. Krino means literally to weigh. So krino, weigh, if you put a kata in front of kito, kata, krino, that's the Greek word for condemn, to weigh down, all right? Whenever you see condemnation in the New Testament, it's always kata krino, to weigh down. Kritikos is from krino. Upo means under kritikos. This word, upokritikos, is in the 1st century. Now, if you do a word study in a major dictionary that will work with the 1st century use of a word, it's the word used in the 1st century to refer to actors or thespians. A thespian or an actor was called the upokritikos. Now, an upokritikos is an actor, all right? Not necessarily a bad actor or an evil actor, but an actor. Because look at what upokritikos is saying. Upokritikos says it's lightweight. See, underweight. Krino means way, upo, underweight. What is an actor? An actor, one way to define an actor in classical Greek would be an underweight person. In other words, he's dressed like Alexander the Great. But we know he's not Alexander the Great. He's underweight. See, he is a fake Alexander the Great, right? But we're not mad, and we're not criticizing him for it. He is doing what an actor does. An actor plays a role, right? That's upokritikos. Unfortunately, that word has become quite negative. Even in the first century, it became negative because it is the word hypocrite. What is a hypocrite? He's underweight. See? He's not what he poses. He's hypocritical. Upokritikos. Now, if it was hyperkritikos, then he would be overweight. But we don't see that word used in the New Testament, hyperkritikos. But upokritikos would be underweight or actor, or when our now with that in mind, notice how Jesus uses it in Matthew when he's teaching on prayer. I love this. He says, now when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites. He now uses, and actually that word goes into English, hypocrites. But you could have translated where Jesus is saying, don't be like the actors who love to preach or to pray in the marketplace and get noticed by people. And notice, Jesus does not condemn them. He says they have their reward. They get paid for that. And by the way, don't ever read that text this way, and I've heard pastors do that Jesus is saying, don't be like the Pharisees. No, he doesn't use Pharisees. He doesn't use priests. He's not making fun of priests, making fun of Pharisees, or making fun of scribes. He just says, don't be an actor when you pray. See, don't be underweight. In other words, mean it. If you're going to pray, mean it. Say what you mean what you say. Okay? Now, that is the word. Now, I want to show you what they did here, what St. Paul did. Paul is a genius with the Greek language, you have to admit. Paul takes upokritikos and puts an A-N in front of it, which is one of the negatives. You know, like if you take gnosis and you put an A in front of it, you have agnostic. I don't know. You put an A in front of any Greek word, it means no. All right? Now you put it's on upokritikos. That's the word used here, and the RSV decided to translate it genuine. But they pulled a trick on you, didn't they? They should have done, I think, what Eugene Peterson did, and they should have done what the Jerusalem Bible did. The Jerusalem Bible decided to show you the meaning of the word that Paul's using. See? Let love be without pretense. Without upokritikos. No upokritikos, okay? No acting. We want no acting with love. We want the love of God. By the way, notice that's how it passed. It starts. Love, let love, and that's the word agape. That's the love from God. Let the love from God that we have as the treasure that comes from God be without pretense. So the word is actually there, instead of genuine, is no upokritikos. Are we together? All right. And then he does another set of tricks with us. I'm not calling them tricks, but I think they're very interesting words. He then says, instead, I want you to have filial, delphos. Now you all know what filial is love. It's a key love word. But the interesting thing about filial love, agape love is the love that has its origin in God's action. It's his event. And then it flows through us. That is agape. Filial love is the love we decide. See, like filial Sophia. I decide I love wisdom. Philosophy. The filial Sophia, the love of wisdom. Or I decide that I love my family. And then I use the word brother, adelphos. And then we get the name of the city of Philadelphia, Philadelphia. See, I decided. We decide that. So filial love is a decisive love that you decide. Remember Peter, when our Lord asked him, do you love me? And he finally says, you know I love you, but he won't say agape. He says filial. And finally Jesus accepts it. He said, okay, that's your decision. That's enough for me. Instead of, you got to have that love of God flowing through you. And Peter is he's too humiliated now to say that. Remember that scene? You know I love you, filial. I decided to love you. And you know, Jesus says, okay, that's good enough. He doesn't correct you and say, no, I want you to love me with agape love. Agape love is God's love that flows through us, but you can't really decide it as much as you can make it genuine. You can say, yes, I agree with it. And so then he says, so let this love, and then he uses 3 filials, and he puts 3 filials together here. Let this love be, notice the RSV said, love one another with mutual affection. All right? That is another filial. That is filial with storge. You know, a lot of you probably don't even know what storge is. Because if you read C.S. Lewis's book, The Four Loves, if any of you read The Four Loves, were you sort of struck that he had a whole chapter on storge? I've talked to lots of people. I remember I was struck with that. Why does C.S. Lewis, because Lewis is mainly working with classical Greek, why would Lewis make a big deal about storge? Storge love is the love of a mother lion for her baby lion. A mother's love for her own flesh and her own child. And it's used that way almost exclusively in the Greek world. The storge love is the love. Now the RSV decided to translate that mutual affection. You can see they're all struggling. How do you describe filial storge? It'd be like, it's a little like saying black is beautiful or white is beautiful. That is storge love. See, I am deciding I like white people. I like black people. I like my tribe. I like my, it's still different than the family. It's a decision I'm making that is very, very earthy and very physical. It's a very physical kind of love. And Paul honors it. He said, I want you to let the love of God flow through you without pretense, without hypocrisy. I want you to first show it to your brothers and sisters, Philadelphia. Then Philia storge, toward your own closest family members, the ones who are of your blood, the same blood as you've got, the same family physically. And that is, now you can see how they are all struggling though to interpret it for us. Love from the center of who you are, don't fake it. He sure get that right, didn't he? Then he says, be good friends who love deeply. And that's how he decides to describe storge, to love deeply. See, love right into your own fabric. And Paul is honoring that. And the RSV is having a little trouble with it, but the RSV decides to translate it mutual affection. And then it goes to outdo one another in showing honor. And Gene Peterson says that put others, when you're honoring others, you're putting yourself subservient to them, which is fine. And do not flag in zeal, be ardent in spirit, serve the Lord, rejoice in hope. Now it's just a lot of wonderful good advice again. Be patient. That's upomeno, by the way. Upomeno means hang in there, you know. That's the word for patient. Be patient in suffering. Persevere in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints. And now I have another problem with the last line. Extend hospitality to strangers. Let's see how Gene Peterson handles that. He says, be good friends with those who love deeply. Practice playing some. Don't burn out. Keep yourselves fueled with flame. Be alert servants of the master. Cheerfully expect. Don't quit in hard times. Pray. Help needy Christians be inventive in hospitality. And the Jerusalem Bible is a little better, I think, on that. Keep praying regularly. Share with any of God's holy people who are in need. Look for opportunities to be hospitable. All right, now I got to give you the third filio. The third filio is filio again. See, again, these are decisions of love that we make. Hold your breath, folks. Filio zeno. What does the word zeno mean?
Love the stranger.
Stranger. Stranger. Or foreigner. For the Jewish world, that's a foreigner. The filio zeno. Nobody can do that easily. So Paul has put the hardest one last. Love the stranger. I'm so sorry they totally anesthetize it with practice hospitality. Practice hospitality is putting out a potluck. But the love of the stranger is different. The love of the stranger is different. It's much more powerful. By the way, you know that is used, the only other place that word is used in the New Testament is in the book of Hebrews. Be sure to love the stranger. Some have entertained angels unawares. You think he's a stranger. Maybe an angel from God. He just doesn't look like an American. He took you by surprise. And that's in the book of Hebrews. That's the only other place where filial zeno is used. But it's the love of the stranger. The love of the person that you don't know. Who's not your own race. Who's not your own nationality. Who's not your own political party. Who's not your own sect. He is strange to you. And Paul is saying, make the decision to love, and it's because of God's love. See, it's all because of God's love. Isn't that powerful? Don't you love St. Paul? I love St. Paul. I love the way he does that. And I'm sorry that none of the translators, I think they got led astray by deciding to translate filio zeno as hospitality. It's, to my mind, that doesn't get anywhere near getting a hold of the richness of that word. And then, of course, it gets very hard after that. Notice, immediately after love the stranger, bless. By the way, the word for bless is one of my favorite of the prefix words. In Greek, if you put an EU in front of anything, you know, EU means good. And here you put an EU in front of logos. You say a eulogy, but it means say a good word. And that's the word that's translated here, bless. A good word for those who persecute you. In other words, a good. It's sort of Paul's goodness theology. I'll give you a little C.S. Lewis line for a minute right now. I've tried to figure out, I made a specialty of studying Lewis in my life because I love the guy so much. But you look at the reasons why Lewis became a believer, and in Surprised by Joy, he gives you one of the real clues to how he became a believer, is when he read an article by G.K. Chesterton. And in that article, he was struck by two things by Chesterton. It's the book Orthodoxy that Lewis wrote. He was an atheist at the time, and he was in a field hospital during the Battle of Somme, and with trench mouth, and he read the Chesterton essay, and he said, there were two things I saw. He said, I don't know why. He made an immediate conquest of me. Chesterton did. I, a cynic, an atheist, why he would have made an immediate conquest of me. And then I was so struck with the two ways he made a conquest of me. One, his humor. Two, goodness. The very thing that so struck J.R. Tolkien. Goodness. If you're a Lord of the Rings fan, you know that goodness is the only thing stronger than the ring. Goodness. It's one of the love words. Agathos. And Paul is doing several plays on the word good in this text. Goodness. Goodness is a great word. It's a great love word. Good. And so here, a good word for those who persecute you. Now, that's the part that's hard. And we'll have to quickly go through this now. Bless those who persecute you. By the way, the word persecute is a bad word. I'm so sorry that sometimes in the New Testament the word persecute is used when that's the wrong word to use. Remember in John 16, Jesus said, these things I have said to you while I'm still with you. In the world you have, now the Greek word is flixus. This is John 16. In the world you have flixus. The RSV mistranslates it. In the world you have persecution. Persecution is another word. It's diokio here, which means to run down. It's a harsher word. And that's not the word Jesus uses there. In the world you have pressure. In flixus, we get the word affliction or tribulation from it. It means intense pressure. In the world you have intense pressure. Don't overstate it, though. Don't say somebody's persecuting you when they're really putting you under pressure. See? But persecute is really a bad word. It means to run down. It literally means to run down. It's used in the gladiator games when they would have the chariots run people down in the arena. And that's persecute, to run a person down into the ground. That is a bad, bad word. And yet, that is the bad word used here. But it burns me up to read a New Testament text where the translators are trying to make it look harder than it really is. In the world you have tribulation. And that's good enough. Leave it there. In the world you have intense pressure. Don't say in the world you have persecution. Not everybody's persecuting you. But a lot of tribulation everywhere. So in the world you have tribulation. Be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. That's wonderful. Here, good word. A good word for those who are now running you down. Okay, now we got some really bad things going on. Bless those who run you down. Bless, and now Paul knows that your instinct is to want to curse them. But he says, bless them, do not curse them. And then he switches completely into something that seems impossible. How could you feel this way toward people that you know are now persecuting you? They're not just, now this are really bad people. They're trying to run you down. So he now says to those who are trying to run you down, rejoice with those who rejoice. Wow. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Do not claim to be wiser than you are. Do not repay anyone evil for evil, but take thought for what is noble in the sight of all. And then he becomes totally realistic. He says, if it is possible, notice, sometimes you have to take up arms to protect people from the marauder. And when you take up arms to protect people from the marauder, see, then it's not possible now to weep with them. You have to stop it. So notice Paul even faces up to that. If it's possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, and then he becomes very strict. Never avenge. By the way, the word avenge means away from justice. Avengement is away from justice. It's just that I'm seeking punishment because I have decided to be judge. See, if you in judgment, you say due process of law. But if I'm going to avenge, that's vigilante justice. I'm going to decide who should be punished. So I'm deciding punishment. And that's avengement. And notice, they make that against the law of God. No, beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave room for the judgment of God, wrath of God, as it is written, vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord. You've got to know that the universe is just, but the justice is in God's hands, not ours. We don't get the right of vengeance. He takes that away from us. And then comes the most amazing set of lines at all. No, if your enemies are hungry, he puts it plural, feed them. If they're thirsty, give them something to drink. For by so doing, you will heap burning coals on their heads. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Now, I do have to clear up one biblical image that's used here that is misunderstood by most people and most interpreters. The one who comes closest not to misinterpreting it is Eugene Peterson. He says, our scriptures tell us, isn't it interesting? Eugene Peterson now quotes the scriptures, actually he's quoting Proverbs there. If you see your enemy hungry, that's Proverbs 25. If you see your enemy hungry, go buy that person lunch. Or if he's thirsty, give him a drink. He's quoting now Proverbs 25. Your generosity will surprise him with goodness. And that's how Eugene Peterson translates the coals of fire on his head. Don't let evil get the best of you. Get the best of evil by doing good. And now you have to clear up something. That picture, Paul is literally quoting Proverbs 25. And Proverbs 25, it puts it this way. If your enemies are hungry, give them bread to eat. If they're thirsty, give them water to drink. For you will heap coals of fire on their heads, and the Lord will reward you. If you're a Bedouin, and remember this is written in a Bedouin era, and you have your camp out in the desert, and it's night and it's cold, and there's another camp near you, and they've decided that they've come in peace and they're not coming in war, okay? That's a big thing in the Bedouin society. Is the person coming with peace in their heart? Remember Lawrence of Arabia, that was the big thing when the people came in. Are they coming with peace, or do they come with vengeance? If they say, we're at peace, peace, and now they're camped, and they have a campfire. Have you seen Survivor? That marvelous CBS study of greed and conniving treachery between people. But notice what is needed the most in Survivor. The ability to do what? Start a fire. That's one of the biggest prizes Survivor gives the contestants is some flint. Start their fire. And then you have the funny thing on TV of watching some city people try to start a fire, even with flint, they can't even start a fire there. The biggest thing is to get a fire going, you ready? Imagine you're in a Bedouin culture and you're out in the desert. There's not that much wood to burn in the first place. And a fire will enable you to heat your food, to boil your water, take care of your children. Now let me ask you the big question. How do you share your fire with someone else's fire in a Bedouin culture? What do? You take coals, right? Now, how do you carry coals from one camp to another in the first century? A Safeway sack? No, the sack would burn up before you get over to the next camp, right? How do? You hold it in a barrel in front of you, then you burn yourself. You put it on your head. And it's in a stone. I did one archaeological dig one summer with my son. We did it in Israel, and we saw these potsherds and these things women would carry them. That's why women's posture is so perfect in the Middle East, because they carry it and the weight goes through the whole body, and you keep your posture. That's the key in mountaineering, is to get the weight to go through your whole body, not go forward, through your body. The only way you can carry weight through your body is to have it on top of your head. And so you put a stone jar on the top of your head, and it's thick enough that you can put coals in it and it won't burn your head. How do you think you carry coals from one family to another family to bless them on their head? And some people think that, and I've heard pastors preach this, that, oh yeah, then you get even with them because they'll be burned up. No, they won't be burned up. They'll get a campfire. They'll be able to survive. And when you help your neighbor survive, then you begin to make them a friend. It's happening right now. It could happen right now in the Middle East. I think I'll give you a little bit of politics from my point of view. I believe one of the best things to give peace in the Middle East is trade. Trade between countries. If Israel can be more generous in giving electricity to Hamas, it will help Hamas survive. If Israel can be more generous with the water prescription, if the exit of the River Jordan toward Jordan, it will help peace in. And if Jordan can be willing to be more careful with water from Jordan, from the Galilee River to Israel, it'll help peace. Trade or sharing fire, sharing what they need, sharing something that another. That's why I felt one of the worst offenses. I read the New York Times yesterday. Drug companies that would buy it, and I was glad that the Wall Street Journal has a story yesterday of companies that are being now raked over the coals. One of them is named a company that is going into bankruptcy because this backfired on them. They would buy poor performing, very low cost drugs and then jack the prices up, triple, because they had a captive audience. But wow, if you don't do that, then you make peace. You do that and you create, that's vengeance. And so notice what St. Paul is doing. He's using a passage from Proverbs, and he understands the context of the Proverbs passage. The Proverbs passage is not a passage of judgment. It's a passage of help. Notice, if your enemies are hungry, give them bread and eat. They're thirsty, give them water and drink. For so doing you heap coals of fire on their heads, and the Lord will reward you. We reward them too. They're rewarded as well. It brings peace. So anyway, notice what Paul has done. And then he ends it all with this great line. Don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Back to good. Goodness. Well, now there's a text. Let me just, and then maybe you'd like to lead us in some Q&A, Mark, with this. But notice in the text that the language helped us. The more we can work with the language, and you'll see that with the Psalms too, the more we can work with the language. Tomorrow we'll work with the story that's present in every text. Work with the story. Make sure that the reader gets the story. And when you've got an imaginary story like a parable that Jesus is teaching, do the same thing with a parable. Let the story be first in your exposition, so they see what's happening in the parable that Jesus is teaching. And here you have an incident too, where it's actually narrated because he quotes the book of Proverbs. But here I decided that we would focus mainly on the language that's used, because the language opens up the text so that we can see the richness of the text. And the richness of this text really, in my opinion, has a lot to do with those three decisive uses of filial. And I think Paul is doing that deliberately. Because filial love is the love I get to decide. I get to decide whether to love my family. I get to decide whether to love my flesh. And you know, some people reject themselves. And I get to decide how I'm going to love the stranger. And it's going to make all the difference for Paul. Okay, I'm over, and we have, we end always at 9 sharp, but we have from now till then. And this is yours. If you want to raise a question or make a comment or anything on this, then let me reflect on that.
And Landon's got his microphone there, and as we're just sort of creating the ecology of letting the text and Earl's really amazing way of shining lights on things we haven't seen before. I wonder if 2 or 3 of us might just be able to share an aha from tonight before we go to specific questions. Any just sort of, wow, never seen it like that before.
I'll say one. The one that was so powerful to me is where you talk about persecution, and really it's the pressure, people pressing down on you. And when you read that text, you think of persecution, but then you think about what they say persecution was in the ancient Near East, you know, where it's not really that, but it makes a lot more sense or it was powerful when you say it's the world pressing down on you. And you'll find yourself in situations like that where there is just pressure.
Yeah.
And you find that you can't get out from under that pressure. And now that you have given us the true meaning of those words, what it means in the original language, then it makes it's just even, it's powerful, because then it helps you to know that yes, the world will press down on you, but there's also instruction there in terms of how you deal with that. So
I love that. And also, if I use the word diopio, which is persecute, then I've got to look for who's doing it. If I see tribulation, the flixus word, which is a kind of more generic, it's non-fastened. It's not fastened to somebody. Then I don't have to necessarily look and see what people in the church are now pushing me down. It may just be the nature of the nature of the thing, that there is pressure because of the schedule, and nobody is necessarily pushing me down, but the schedule is pushing me down. And that's where tribulation, that becomes a better word, flixus, and we get the word affliction from flixus. But it's not a judgmental word, whereas persecute is judgmental, because it has got somebody in mind. There's somebody out there that's driving that chariot and is trying to run me down. And that was true in the first century. They did hunt it. That's what was so sad about the Nazi era, hunting down the Jews. They literally wished harm to a group of people, and they were tracking them down. And it is a terrible, terrible tracking. It's different.
Another aha?
In this passage, thank you. In this passage where you say, for doing this, you will heap burning coals on their heads. Did I understand you to say that was an illustration of a blessing?
I think it is
That's
an
an aha for me.
It is an illustration of blessing. Yeah, not of judgment. It's in the Proverbs. It's an illustration of help. Of help to another Bedouin tribe. And I think people in the first century would hear it that way. Now, we're not used to coals on your fire. We think of putting something on your head, we think of it as totally grim, of putting something horrible like that on your head. But in the first century, they wouldn't think of it as something horrible to put. They would move all fire that way. They would be moving coals that way. And everybody would know it.
So that phrase is tied in with the fact that if they're hungry, you feed them. If they're thirsty, you give them something to drink. For doing this, you'll heap burning coals on the head. That's an addition. That's an additional blessing.
An additional blessing.
That's
yes.
amazing. Okay.
And in the first century, if you know,
I understand.
and you know, that's where cultural understanding is important in biblical research, because if you know that culturally, that's the only way campfires could be moved from place to place.
Very clear.
It has to be moved on your head.
Thank you, sir.
Hey, I love that.
This isn't the language of the text, but you were citing a book in which Lewis was struck by Chesterton's arguments, one humor and two goodness. Which Lewis book?
Okay, that's Surprised by Joy, and it's, in fact, that's toward the end of the book, when he's telling about his time in the field hospital in France. And he said, in that, I had two things happen to me. I read the Chesterton book. And then after that, he has this humorous line that he said, I didn't have the cynic's nose, Lewis said. Whenever I saw goodness, I always respected it. It had nothing to do with any desire on my part to be good. But I respected goodness when I saw it. And you know, I love that line because I've been a pastor long enough to know that people do. I don't care how tough they are. They always recognize genuine goodness. And it is a huge mark in people becoming Christians. I met somebody that was good. They were really good. In fact, a young man was in our home just the other day, and we asked these two young people to share. There were four, but these two young people especially shared about the formative influences in their childhood growing up. and they made both of them. It was really touching. They said there was so much support for me when I was a little kid growing up. The people, and he was referring to people in the church, and in their case, their fathers were both Young Life leaders. And he said the older Young Life kids, I was a little boy, my dad was dragging me along, and these older teenagers treated me, and in fact, then he told a funny story. He said these older teenagers, I was only about 8 years old, and what they really loved me. And in fact, one time they took tape and taped me to a pole to keep me from running around where I was bothering me. And I realized that they really did love me. They taped me to a pole. But it was beautiful. He was experiencing goodness, and it was a big marker in his becoming a believer. It certainly is true for Lewis.
So was the humor part, he experienced the goodness from Chesterton. Did he experience the humor from Chesterton? Okay.
Yeah, and I always memorize that quote from, I'll give it to you as close as I can get to actual memory. He said, his humor was not like the kind I hate, like little raisins put into a cake, little bits and pieces put in that are not a part of the real cake. But what I like is the humor that is in no way separated from the argument itself. It's a part of the argument itself. And then he has an illustration. He said it's like a sword who has a sword, and the sword glistens, not because he shows it to you and shows how it glistens, but because he's fighting for his life, and therefore it's moving fast. So that was what he goes on to make that as a parable. Lewis is great for saying stories like that. It's like the swordsman who did not, it wouldn't be awful if the swordsman kept showing his sword. Look how bright my sword is. But he said he showed that the sword glistened because he was using it. And it was moving so fast that it sparkled. And he said that's the humor of Chesterton. Chesterton's humor is a part of the argument itself. And that part of the argument itself makes it really fun.
Just a thought about your conversation on the heaping coals on the head. I was wondering where you were going to go with that. It made me immediately, every time I read that, it makes me think of a woman who was a retired missionary that went to our church in her latter years before she passed away. She'd been a missionary to India for 44 years. On her way, there's a book written called Delayed Manila, and for 2 years she was in a prison camp in Manila on her way by ship to be a missionary to India. And many of the people died in this internment camp. They captured people during the war, Second World War, and eventually was released. And instead of saying, well, I guess the missionary thing didn't work out for me, and go back home, she went on then to India and served there for over 40 years as a Quaker missionary and setting up schools. And she talked about that concept of the little metal cans that people would carry on their heads, keeping coals in them. And she always brought this kind of peacemaking twist to that, rather than saying, I'm going to get them back with love. You know, we hear that phrase, kill them with kindness and things like that.
No, don't kill them.
But she said it helps someone get their fire started. That's the whole thing, is they, you know what, when you treat people with kindness, maybe they realize perhaps a change could take place for them too. And so thank you for affirming her interpretation that I thought so much of for many years ago.
God bless her. Yes, Tony.
I have a practical question, Earl. If you were going to use this scripture for a sermon, it has so many rich thoughts and concepts. Would you use this whole text, or would you have a sermon series and break it into 2 or 3 or 4 different parts?
Hey, listen, I'll tell you, there are all kinds of ways to do this right. And one way is to, if you've got something that's so is so interesting in itself, take that, you might say, segment of the whole, and let that segment of the whole stand on its own merits. And I think you could do a sermon easily and just say, you know, this is a big text, but I just want to take the 3 filials that he does a play on. Because obviously that's integrity to the servant, to the Paul obviously is zeroing in on those three uses of that interesting word in Greek. Phileo, 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 which is a decisive love that we decide, okay? And then let that stand by itself. And of course you could do a whole field day on upocriticus, because everybody wants to be an actor, but and it's not necessarily bad to be lightweight. Notice that our Lord does not make fun of the actors, but he says, I don't want your prayer to be like the guys that are actors. I want your prayer to be not acting. And so how to say not acting? Well, not like the hypocrites, not like the upocriticos. And you could have a field day on just that, but I think you have to be careful that you don't bore people with, once when I was a student here at Princeton, I went up to Boston on a trip, and every one of us wanted to hear Harold J. Ockenga preach at the Park Street Church in Boston. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to go to Boston, was to hear Harold J. Ockenga. He was the founder of Fuller Seminary, your school. He was the founder of that school, and from Boston. And I went to the Park Street Church to hear him, and he was preaching, and he said, this is now sermon 56 in a series on the book of Acts. And they were up to about Acts 13. But I mean, I would never dare 56 sermons, but I have preached through the book of John by breaking it into segments and say, okay, we're going to do Feast of Tabernacles now. That would be chapters 14 through the 16. And we're going to do you can do that without boring. You got to be careful you don't bore your people.
Thank you.
My mother used to grade my sermons, because she was very bright, and she would tell me sometimes, as she would criticize me, and she'd say, because my mother and dad listened to all my sermons. I was preaching in Berkeley. They lived in Sacramento, and they would get them on tape, and my dad would grade them. And I got all those tapes back from my dad, and he'd put grades on them, good or okay, or B or D, C, But my mother, she one day said to me, Earl, I don't know about all these word studies. And then she said to me, I didn't want to know that much about, what was it? It wasn't octopuses, but she'd pick she had some animal that she would tell me. I didn't want to know that much about that animal. And so you told me a little bit more about that animal than I wanted to know. And so I tried to remember that, not to tell my mother more about octopuses than she really wanted to know. But at any rate, yes, you can divide things up and do a good job too.
I can't resist this. If EU means good, what is good about a eunuch?
A eunuch?
Yeah. Sorry, I just can't get it out.
I don't know the we have a classical Greek scholar here. Is eunuch built on the EU strict? It may not be. See, like for instance, utopia is not EU. It's just simple U.
Okay.
U and topia means place. So utopia means no place. So eunuch probably is not EU. It's just U. And I've never in other words, not sex. It's non-sexual.
So that brings us to, it's about time to cut off.
Oh, that's terrible.
She's very upset that we're heading on that note. Anyone last thought? Hey, here's the last thought. Hey, good.
Please move us in a different area. You didn't speak to this, but is there anything under this whole leave room? I mean, because clearly we're not supposed to be involved in the wrath of the vengeance, but the text is pretty clear that God is God, and God is aware of some of these things. But I didn't looking at the leave room. One of them has to do with something about leave it to retribution. Is there anything under that? Because I'm fascinated by that idea.
Okay.
I'd love to know more about what leaving room or allowing God to be God in those moments.
I have a whole set of thoughts that are in that territory. For instance, our Lord, when he says, come unto me all you that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you. Now the RSV says, I'll give you rest, but that's not a good translation. It's pause, is the word he uses. I'll give you pause. And I think I've heard again sermons, I'll give you rest, I'll give you completeness. No, Jesus is saying, I'll give you space. I'll give you space. And then he says, learn from me. See, and be yoked with me. But to speed, which the RSV does, when they quickly give you, you might say, a resolution word. When Jesus didn't give a resolution word, he gave a halfway to the station word. And you know, that's a little bit like leave room, leave space. And I think you could make a whole argument that throughout the New Testament, there's so much teaching where a space is provided for us. And that's different than rest. See, rest is a completion word. So when Jesus says, come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you, if you're going to preach on that text, be sure you use the right word. I will give you pause. I'll give you space. Then you can learn. And the same thing that Paul's doing, though I'm not saying he's building it on what Jesus did, but he's doing the same thing. Leave pause. Leave space for God to do the work that only God can do. And you know, that's very good in evangelism. When you share your faith, I always say this to pastors, and we try to say it in our family too. A boy or girl has got to have their own journey. And you've got to preserve that right for that boy or girl, young man or woman, to have their own journey, to have their own space. And that means you have to sometimes wait a long time before they're able to hear. And then I always say to a young evangelist, when I talk to young life leaders, I always say to young life leaders, take the time that it takes. And we were joking about it the other day because my study assistant was in Young Life, we did so much of it. And the big joke in Young Life is that the beginning of the week at Malibu, say, some of those kids that are the wildest kids and are so much, troublemakers, they're the ones at the end of the week that are often making sometimes the most substantial choices for their faith. But you have to give them the chance to have their own journey. You can't speed the journey up necessarily, though you'd love to. And I just love that Jesus does that literally in the Gospel of Matthew when that text says, I'll give you pause. Hey.
Want to pray us out?
Oh, I'll pray us out. Heavenly Father, we are grateful for the fact that we can be together here and we can visit, talk, and then we can learn. And we can have that wonderful moment when the text itself just surprises us and blesses us. So, Lord, thank you for that too. Now be with us as we sleep tonight and tomorrow with all the fun things we're going to think about tomorrow. Bless us in Christ's name. Amen. Amen.